I was looking at the questions that you asked. We talked a great deal about people and relationships, and I answered a few of the questions that weren't answered with everyone individually. So, but there was one little piece that was in there, and it was, how do you, when you're with people whose energy is not compatible with yours and is contrary to yours, negative, pulling you down in one way, how do you protect yourself against that energy? And that seems like a real question, because we don't yet have a community, and much of your life is spent in uncongenial circumstances. Many of you might even have a home that's uncongenial. These things exist. Or have an offspring who is a cuckoo egg and doesn't actually match your family, which does happen, you know. It happens more that, anyway, you know what that is. Cuckoo just drops it and the egg hatches, and there you have it. I watched this movie called Migration, which was a wonderful documentary about birds. My recollection is the very first scene is a nest, and it's just a nest, and there's 3 baby birds in it, and they're blind still, and their mouths are open, and they're waiting for mama to come and drop the regurgitated worm or whatever it is. Swami was very unsentimental about things. And he said to my friend who was pregnant, who had just given birth, and she had to leave because she had to go take care of her child, and he said, "Going to go deliver the old regurgitated worm," eh? Like that. She had an inclination to be very romantic, and he was always just taking down her romance. So ever since then, I always think of delivering the old regurgitated worm. But why not? We might as well enjoy. But in any case, so there's these 3 birds, and 2 of them are little tiny, and the third one is like 3 times as big as the other 2. And obviously, it was either a cuckoo bird or some bird who dropped its nest, and they're an irresponsible mother or a very clever mother who just figured out how to, have the child raised, but not by her. Early fostering. But the big one systematically threw the other 2 little ones out of the nest. So by the time the mother came, there was just it there, and it could get the 3 times the food. And I, who have spent so much of my life trying to help people through their traumas, I think, my gosh, it begins so early. Like way back when we were like 3 jivas and we were 3 little birds, and you knocked me out of the nest, and we wonder why we have these spontaneous reactions to people. And it's also really true that a great deal of what our responses are not at all happening in the present. That they are unresolved issues from the past, and were brought back either literally with the same people, or brought back with their surrogates, who are going to trigger the same thing in us. And it's our own energy that is needing to be resolved, and then something happens to bring it to the surface. I was sharing this at the table, maybe at breakfast. Yogananda made this very complicated statement once that I have thought about a long time. Time itself is an illusion. I mean, I'm saying these words not because I know them, but I know it to be true. And the past and the present and the future, from a certain perspective, are all equidistant. Okay? But not in our experience, because when we live in the realm of the material world, then time is sequential. This was asked of me actually by an attorney who was working for Ananda at that time. He asked me about reincarnation, and he asked if you can reincarnate forward and backwards. Can you go back and I'd never thought about that, so I asked Swamiji the question, because he was still with us and I could. He said reincarnation itself takes place in the material world in which time rules. So you can't play with time like that. You can't go backward and forward. So you do incarnate sequentially, not necessarily to the same planet, but nonetheless, you don't just go backwards. Now, there's lots of things about that I can't answer, but it was interesting to me in any case, and I'm going to give you another thing about time, since I'm talking about it, because it's interesting. When Swami Kriyananda was a child, from his earliest memory as a child, as a baby, the way he would fall asleep, he writes this in his autobiography, the way he would fall asleep is that he would shut his eyes and this great light would appear. And he would, and he would stare into that light and it would gradually expand, and then he would lose consciousness of this world, sleep. And he thought that's what everybody did. Because it just, in childhood, you just think that's what everybody did. It was quite a few years before he realized that wasn't what everybody did. In fact, I think he was about 9 before he realized that. And when various things happened to him and he felt he had to relate to this world more, and he became somewhat suspicious of altered states of consciousness. That was just the karma of the moment. What actually happened was, he was the firstborn child of his father, and his father was a scientist and Swami was a philosopher, is how he put it. And the father naturally wanted his firstborn to be interested in what he was interested in. His father always wanted to know how things worked, and Swami always wanted to know why. And there was just a fundamental, when he began to realize that his father's world was the more normal world and his world was the exception, he decided to try to conform more to his father's world, until he met Master from the age of 9 to 22. That was that cycle. So what Swamiji said, he realized he went into a state of superconsciousness. That was sleep for him. And then he withdrew from it at the age of 9. He meets Master, he gets initiated as a disciple. He goes back into that superconscious state. Swami rarely talked about his own state of consciousness. And this one, quite honestly, I watched him. He slipped into it by accident, and then he was committed and he had to finish. And he said, after I got Kriya and started meditating, I went back into the superconscious state that I used to go into when I was a child. And I mean, others who know Swami know how rarely he would just make a statement like that. But here was the interesting point. He said, and it was exactly the same moment, because in superconsciousness there is no time. Now, later, he wrote a book. It's a children's story, more or less. It's called The Time Tunnel. And it's about these 2 boys, and he pretends it's himself and his actual brother. And they were in Romania, where they actually did grow up. And he has this adventure. They discover a time tunnel. They go backward and forward in time. It's a very, very interesting book. He talks about ancient Egypt. He talks about Atlantis. I said to him afterwards, oh, it's so relaxing to write fiction, because you can just express your intuitive understanding of things without any rational support. You just get to declare it. So he declared a lot about Atlantis and about Egypt, and nobody could challenge because it was fiction. But from that book, I got a picture that I had never been able to understand. Okay, I'm going to just pretend that I'm drawing a big circle here, like this. And this is the sphere of time. Here's past, and we go to the present like this. And the center point of that is superconsciousness, right? And we live on the spokes. We live on the rim of that wheel, like this, each one of us. And we incarnate sequentially. If it's moving like a clock, we incarnate sequentially. So the past is closer up here, and the future is on this side, and we're somewhere about here. And most people just live in the present moment. They don't think about reincarnation. Often they're quite unreflective about their past, and they're quite surprised by the future. It's just like cause and effect is not their strong suit. When we first moved into the community where we presently live, which is an apartment complex, when we first began to move into it, there were a lot of other people living there, and it was a little bit run down, and a lot of the people were not they weren't terribly aware of things. And the little apartment where I was living at that point backed onto the driveway where people would drive. And one Saturday morning, everybody has jobs. One Saturday morning at 7 a.m., this man pulls his car up right to there, opens the hood to do some work on it, and turns on the radio really loud. He's literally about 4 feet from my bedroom window. And just plays the radio, just full blast. because he wants to work on his car and he wants the radio. The idea that there would be an implication beyond his little sphere, he wasn't a bad person, he just was unaware of that fact. And I know later in his life, somebody's going to be very inconsiderate of him, and he's going to be outraged. Because he didn't live in the present in the cosmic sense. He was just unaware of consequences like that. And that's how most people live. Now, and you're just only aware of this much. As you expand your consciousness, you basically move from the rim, you start moving toward the center, toward superconsciousness. It's not like you're on the rim and then you pop to the middle. And this is a very important point that's also on my list there. And this has to do with why the Gita recommends killing people, is that it's directional what we're doing. You see? It's like wherever we stand, it's not like there's a prescribed next stage. We just face toward greater awareness and do something to move us toward it. And we're behaving correctly if the direction of our development is correct. It can't be measured other than that. So, and there's more I could say about that, but then it won't fit this image. So as we begin to move towards superconsciousness, what happens is you get a little bit away from the rim. So when you turn back to the rim, you can see more than the one dot where you were standing. Suddenly you have a tiny little triangle that you can see. And so you understand more of the past and more of the future. You begin to examine your childhood. You begin to set goals for the future. You begin to realize I can do something in the present that will change what happens tomorrow. Just like that. But you don't know it if you're just sitting on the rim because you can't see the direction. So as awareness increases, and all increase in awareness is moving towards superconsciousness, the river's heading for the sea, and we can smell the salt breeze now. So you start moving, and the triangle gets bigger and bigger. And when you finally get to the center of that wheel, now also bear in mind that if you're thinking of a wheel, the wheel will spin, but the center just stays in the same place, doesn't it? The wheel keeps moving around. The center may turn, but it never leaves its spot. So when you're at the center of superconsciousness, past, present, future, it's equidistant. None is closer, none is farther away. Isn't that interesting? From the outside, it all has to follow sequentially, but when you stand in the center, that's why the masters can see what's going to come. There's this remarkable thing in India. It's called the Book of Brigu. It's not really a book. It's many, many collections of writings. Brigu lived, 5,000, 10,000 years ago. A great sage, still recognized. And he wrote predictions for people who would live, hundreds and hundreds of years in the future. And I've never been to a Brigu reader, and not all Brigu readers are legitimate. So there's many caveats here for those of you who are about to head to India. But in 1960, Swami Kriyananda was there. He wrote a little book about it. It's called the Book of Brigu. And he was taken to this Brigu reader, and I think he did it by astrology. Sometimes they do it by astrology, either your birth chart or the moment that you come in, or by your fingerprint. And then they have all these pages that are wrapped in cloths, and they look for it, and they see if they have... And Kriyananda was a very unusual name in itself. He was only known by Kriyananda, but he has an American name, J. Donald Walters, James Donald Walters. Most people didn't even know it was James. They find this, they say he's Kriyananda, his guru is Yogananda, his father is Ray Walters, his father is a geologist, he would not be born in his home country, he would grow up in Europe, and just went like this, with all these things that were not superficial, but absolutely exact. Just exactly that. How do it know? But standing at the point of superconscious, it's all just equal to us. Now, all of this is just to bend our brains a little and break us out of our little way of thinking. So now to come back to where I started, because I'm like a jazz singer, I just hit a note and I start running. I had a friend who was a drummer, and he talked about how you play off your errors. You know, you're playing a rhythm, you miss the beat, and then you make that the beat. So that Master said, because in the world of time that we live in, one event follows the next event, we make the natural assumption that one event causes the next event. I mean, how else would we think about it? Here we are, this is what happens. And speaking of human relationships, it gets us into a lot of trouble in our relationships because you say something that strikes a chord in me and I react, let's say in a negative way, and I think that your remark caused me to suffer. Now, your remark might have been thoughtless and unkind, but I wouldn't suffer unless, now bear this in mind, karma doesn't start 1 second before that remark happens. Karma has started for a very long time, and there's something in me that is ripe to express itself. There's a piece of popcorn that's about to go like that, okay? And then you speak, and I go, and I naturally think that what just happened caused what just happened. But if the karma wasn't there to be expressed, it would not have responded to your remark. And you would not have been standing in front of me to say it either. But all of these different forces are working together, which is why it's such a mess when we try to make each other responsible for how we feel. Because the destiny is so much bigger and so much longer than that. You know, there's so much going on. One of the principles of education for life has to do with the different stages of life. And I mentioned that the consciousness is fully present and fully formed in the child. But for the first, 10 or 12 years, sometimes, not always, the ego is not yet, the child does not yet identify with the incarnation and its own behavior. This is one of the things I remember learning from Nitai, the EFL original developer, who was saying that, that the child observes the behavior but does not identify with it. And so when the adults around it think that the fact that you spilled your milk every day is you spilling your milk, the child knows the milk is spilled every day, but the cause and effect relationship is a little obscure to them. And also even the sense of responsibility. So you both have a problem because the milk is all over the table. But he was talking about how you have to understand that the child doesn't see himself or herself as their behavior. But about puberty is when the ego comes in and the little holiday, insofar as you've had one, just really grabs. And so you say to your darling little daughter, honey, maybe you could clean up your room before you go to school. And she says, you hate me, you always have. And you say, what? Because all of a sudden now they have identified with their own life experience in a very different way. So greatly simplified. But you see, but we identify very deeply with the things that happen. And we make the mistake of thinking that it's being caused from outside. So it's a very, very, very interesting idea. Now, don't misunderstand. That doesn't mean that you can avoid interacting, or that you have no right to respond appropriately to what people have said to you. But once we start down the rabbit hole of my karma is your responsibility, it's going to be really hard to get out. Okay, so I started with the question of protecting yourself from negativity. So all of this, now this is my peculiar bend, and you all are in the room with me. You don't ever have to be in a room with me again. But this is, I find, that if we can get the fundamental ideas really clear, and then even when we get sucked in by the geyser of our own karma, we know how to get out of it. Because we can just, when we finally calm down, or cheer up, or whatever it is, we can ask ourselves, what is the principle here? What is the true principle here, and then how does it apply in the present instance? And then we can reverse engineer the problem a little bit and find out, where the point is that I went wrong and I can go right again. Now, for many years in my life, I'm not I didn't make a big body. I'm a sort of a small person, and I've always been very extended in my awareness of things. And so I have been very sensitive, like this. And for many, many years of my life, I prided myself on that. And because, of course, I'm so sensitive, I'm a little delicate. Oh, no, that's just much too. No, I can't go there. It's, no, like this. And I thought this was a virtue. I really did. Because, of course, that kind of sensitivity in the work I do is very helpful. But I just kept thinking that was a good thing. And then some of you have heard me say this. Did I even say this here? Forgive me if I did. But this friend of mine, big man, I don't think there's anyone in the room who's as big as he is. Big man, big bass voice, singer, strong, powerful energy, always just moving through life like this. We were doing a class together in affirmations. And I'm kind of casual about prepping in advance, so he was going to do some affirmations, and that was all I knew. We're sitting next to each other in these two chairs. He starts this affirmation, which I had actually read in the book. And the affirmation was, I am powerful, I am strong, the universe bows to my will, something on that order. All I could think of, when he started, I started going, I am weak, I am delicate. I couldn't actually contradict him. But the bigger he got, the smaller I got. And also the more, just like pathetic. And I suddenly thought to myself, what is wrong with you? The more we get spiritually strong, we're not more vulnerable. We may be more aware, but why on earth would we be more vulnerable? And I just started, I am big, I am strong, you're a puny person next to me, just like... But it made me realize how often we play it from the wrong end, And if we are deeply and profoundly rooted, if we are disciples of a master, which many of you are, if we regularly attune ourselves to divine energy, not that we are, but we can be impervious to everything. And it's not that we need to pretend that we are, but we have to realize we don't have to fold in the front of this energy. It's just energy. I used to have this thing about people who would stand too close to me and talk too loud. I have sensitive hearing, and sometimes people's sense of personal space was just not the same as mine. And this was part of the whole cycle of just being so delicate. And there was this one man in particular. He was from somewhere in Eastern Europe. And because English wasn't his first language, he thought he needed to speak it particularly loudly because then perhaps I could understand it better. And he liked to talk to me. And he would stand really close to me, and because he was so tall, he would lean over me, So it'd be like standing under a tree when he would talk like that. But he became my sadhana, my going to the gym. And because I would stand there and I think, what difference does this make? It's not necessarily where I would choose to spend my time, but what difference does this make? Why am I bothering to react? And that's just a question you ask yourself. Why am I bothering to react? Now, there is such a thing as powerful energy that's stronger than your magnetism. So if you are genuinely with someone whose power of negativity is stronger than your power to hold your center, or even more imaginary, to convert them to your vibration, run away. As fast as you can, in whatever way you can. Just run away. Put distance between you, because you can't just allow yourself to be overwhelmed. Master said, when you know you're going to be defeated, run away. I love that. You rarely get confirmation for what you want. But much of the time, we're just annoyed. Right? Or we feel threatened when there's actually no threat. So you have to balance these things. However, if you are trapped in an environment where the energy is negative, pray to the masters. just put a shield of protective energy around me. I had a very interesting experience, which I hadn't thought about for years. There was the California State Atheist Society was having a convention in our area. And the woman who was organizing it, I have no idea how she got my name, but she called me and she wanted me to come and be part of it. She wanted to be part of a panel, a kind of like a representatives of many religions were going to be there so we could talk to the Atheist Society of California. And I said no, and she kept calling me, and I finally thought, well, okay, I'll go. The celebrity guest, who was, I don't know who he was, the king of the California Atheist Society. Honestly, if they had called Hollywood and said, we're going to put on an atheist convention and we need someone to play the king of the atheists, this man was perfect. He was kind of angular. He was dressed all in black. He had lanky, kind of hideous hair that he had dyed blacker. He was just like, he was a caricature. And they were all there, and there was another man who'd been filing lawsuits. The American dollar bill says, "In God we trust." He was filing lawsuits to get that taken off. And anyway, all of this is going on. And all of a sudden, it's like, what have I gotten myself into? But here's what was so much fun. There was an Episcopalian, some Presbyterian guy. There was a Christian fundamentalist, and there was me. And the Episcopalian, God bless him, was trying to be conciliatory, and like this, and I don't know what was going on. The fundamentalist guy and I were just like two little children. We just kept hunkering closer and closer together, We were actually whispering to each other. We weren't afraid. We were just incredulous that we were both there. And at one point I said to him, in any other circumstances, we probably wouldn't be on the same side. And he agreed. He said, but in the presence of the real enemy, our alliance is strong. And actually, I kept in contact with that man for a number of years, just in a casual way. But there is such a thing. And it, with all due respect, it was evil. It was really evil. I've hardly ever been in a place where I've been in a few places where you could, I never see, but I could almost see. I could almost see the demons just having a party there. And I felt so sorry for those people, But I had a partner, which was nice. But also it's like, they can't touch us. He can't really touch me. They can't really touch us. And that's what we have to cultivate within ourselves. You don't go out and seek it. But when it comes to you and you feel you're in a dark place, if you can't run away, then run away inwardly. And don't engage. Don't converse. And I'm going to even add something else. Don't pray for these people even. I've had friends who've, for various reasons, such as divorce and things like that, you end up entangled with someone whose energy is much more negative than yours is positive. And I remember in one situation, well, every day I pray for so-and-so. No! I said, don't pray for them. Don't make a link. Just say to Divine Mother once, your problem, too big for me. And just leave it. Humility, which is a virtue to be prized above all others, is self-honesty. Humility is self-honesty. I am neither the best nor the worst, but what I am is what I am. And if this is too big for me, freely and happily admit it. And don't feel that spiritual truth demands that you pretend. You have to be absolutely authentic. So, and you can visualize a field of light around you. You can even swing your arms kind of like you're just being casual and make a magnetic ring around yourself. There's all kinds of things you can do. I wear a Kriya, I'm not wearing it because of the mic, but I wear a Kriya mala. You can kind of touch your mala, touch your heart. And if you know you're going to be in negative places, put a picture of Babaji or Yogananda somewhere in your clothing. in your pocket, in your shirt pocket, tuck it in your, tuck it under your undershirt. And just when somebody starts talking to you, I've really literally done that when I've been in difficult situations. I have to face something that's a little hard for me. Just keep it like that. Okay? Does that help? A friend of mine, very successful businessman, had a chair in his office that he kept in an inconvenient place so nobody else would ever use it. And that's where Jesus sat. And whenever he had an important decision to make, he'd just glance over to see what his real business partner thought about it. And others, who can't really do it, you have it in your desk drawer. You just open your desk drawer, it's a little picture of the master. Or you put some code on the wall that only you understand. You put the picture of the master behind that beautiful flower painting on the wall. And every time you look at the painting, you know that the masters are behind it. Use every tool that you have. Okay? So, do we have any question anyone wants to ask before I go back to my piece of paper over here? Or comment on the things I'm saying? Yes, Roger? Are you raising your hand or you're just stretching? Okay.
So, I think everything exists for a reason.
Yes.
What could be the reason for things like duality, evil,
Oh, what could be?
energy?
Oh dear, we're above my pay grade, but I'll try. Everything exists for a reason. What can be the reason for cruelty and evil and darkness and so on? That's what you're asking? Is that fair?
Yeah.
Why? What you're actually asking is, why did God make it the way he made it? Which is really above my pay grade. Vivekananda's answer to that essential question is, the level of consciousness that asks the question is incapable of comprehending the answer, which was an extremely clever way of getting out of answering it. However, that starts from the premise that this world is supposed to be a pleasant experience, that the purpose of this world is that we're supposed to enjoy it, and that it's all supposed to be just like us. This is partly a memory of the astral world. In the astral world, where everything is vibration, okay, let me phrase it differently. A planet like this one, at this stage of evolution, the Yuga cycle, which is the 4 ages, rising and falling ages, which is in Autobiography of a Yogi, which is a whole thing in itself. Suffice to say, there's a 24,000-year cycle that this Earth goes through as it moves closer and then farther away from the galactic center. These are traditions, and they're also verified scientifically and to a certain extent. We are, on the upward half, we're about here. So we're going up. That's why everything is changing so rapidly, like this. However, it's a heterogeneous planet, which is, it's a planet in which many different vibrations of consciousness, and that's really how you have to think about it. It's not races, it's not countries, it's vibrations of consciousness on the scale between complete delusion and total enlightenment. And I was recently in South Africa, which of course is totally obsessed with race and ethnicity and all of that. It's quite, as you all know, and now I know more, very complicated country based on the bodies that people are in. And the bodies that people are in is not the indication of who they are. Who they are is the vibration of consciousness on which they live. And so sometimes we would be with people of a certain ethnicity or certain color of skin, and there was no difference because our vibrations were the same. And then sometimes we would be with people of certain ethnicities or certain whatever, and there was a tremendous sense of difference. But it wasn't because of the material body they were in, it was because their vibration was very, very different. And if we move through this world, we know we meet people, some people whose vibrations are very much like ours, and others whose vibrations are not like ours. And sometimes, just as I was speaking, who are repellently different than us. Just we don't want to be anywhere close to it. Or it elicits great sympathy, many different things, but there's a difference. in the astral world, and this is me telling you what the masters say, and I like half know these things, because there's no material obstacle and we are just vibrations, the astral world is divided up according to vibrations. And we exist in the vibratory universe that is natural to us. When my friend Linda was dying, and Swamiji came to see her, and she asked him about the astral world, and she was a very elegant person who spent her whole life making things beautiful. For years, she decorated our temple for every holiday. Her own home was just like a palace of beauty. Her husband made lots of money, and he let her spend it how she wanted to. And she spent it to make things beautiful. And she was a very deeply spiritual person. Swami said to her, because you're such a spiritual person, because you have such a love of beauty, you're going to go to a beautiful astral world. You know, where you'll be with saints and you'll be with angels, and everything will be to your taste. You know, just exquisite. But then he went farther. He said, but don't just relax and make yourself comfortable there. You can still grow. You know, don't just get too comfortable. But, and in those worlds, and this is, if you read books about angels and about other realms, the higher realms can see and descend and help the lower realms. And just as many of us are dedicated to helping to uplift, just because we die, as Swami said, we don't become somebody else. So many of us will inhabit refined worlds, but our day job is going to be trying to uplift others who don't know. And but if people have dark energy, they can't penetrate, they can't invade the light realms. They live in those darker realms. There's a marvelously interesting story about a woman who tried to kill herself and succeeded to the point of going into the astral world, but she didn't stay dead, she came back. And she fell into the suicide world where it was a world of despair, because at least people commit suicide for any number of reasons. But she had committed out of despair, so she was in this universe of despair. And there were a lot of people, and they were despondent. She felt like many of them had been there for quite a long time. And she was not a religious person, but oddly, to her, as she writes it later, the single word Jesus occurred to her. And when she thought the word Jesus, without even having any association with it particularly, as she said that word, she looked up. And she realized that just above this world of despair, there were all these light beings. And all those light beings were trying to reach the people in despair and bring them out of it. And as soon as she looked up and saw that world, she moved up into that world, like that. And then they sent her back, and she told the story. Isn't that interesting? So part of our frustration with being here is that we remember a world that was different. And what people do in the material world is we try to recreate the astral world we're from. And it was very interesting when we moved into our community, and it was a bit run down, and the people, it was very transient, and a lot of the people were, they didn't cope that well with being human beings. They weren't evil, they just were not that effective. And most of their apartments had dark, heavy, ugly furniture, dark, heavy, ugly rugs, and they kept the dark, heavy curtains closed. Just because that was the astral world they were more familiar with. You know, that was just the vibration that they were more familiar with. I don't say any of this judgmentally, just fascinatingly. And then we moved in, and we opened the curtains, and we changed the rugs, and we painted the walls, and we put in skylights, and we put in lavender furniture. You know, because that's the astral world that we're from, like that. So those are the two elements of it. We actually move around in our own vibration, and we naturally find it. And there's a tremendous amount of effort to try to break that down and have us all mix up with each other, but we don't. We just naturally, you know, we can be serviceful and so on, but we match. Now, that doesn't have anything to do with class or race or anything like that, but it's vibration. This planet, however, this is not the astral world. This is the material plane. We think it's meant to be a place for a vacation. But this is a tough school. We've sort of signed on to a major university here, and it's intended to be a major university. And so it's fully designed to throw us right up against what we don't know. And part of what happens is that we don't like that icky energy. And even more than disliking it, we have trouble loving those people, our hearts are closed, and we're frightened. Above all, we're frightened. And so we get to learn not to be. Yes?
Is the ascension that you describe,
I'm sorry, say it one more time.
Is the ascension that you describe into the astral world
Uh-huh.
and our path on the yugas
Uh-huh.
as we ascend, are we going to experience that while we're still alive?
Oh, the change of the yugas? No.
No, the higher vibration, the lack of materialism, our light beings. So
Do we have to die to experience it?
we used to have to die to achieve that. Is our ascension now going to enable us to achieve that while we are still living?
It's an error to say we used to have to die, because there's the material plane and there's the non-material plane. However, consciousness transcends the material plane, so it's always been true that if we shift our consciousness, we can discover any realm. When Jesus was living in this world, he was also not living in this world. When Yogananda was living in this world, he was as at home and as present in the astral world as he was in the material world. So where your consciousness is has nothing to do with where the planet is that you've incarnated and what yuga it's in. However, the more elevated the planet is, the less gross it is, and the fewer, the lighter the souls that are drawn to it, because there's nothing here for them. When in a very high age, a soul that wants to live at a very much more materialistic, gross level, this is no fun being here. And they wouldn't be drawn to it because they wouldn't be able to relate to it. They wouldn't be able to learn anything from it. I'll go farther for what's going on now. I was saying this at breakfast this morning. This is my own way of talking about it, but this makes me less nervous. Divine Mother loves everybody exactly the same. There's not one of us that is more divine than any other, and our divine parents are extremely equal in their affection for us. They're not stupid. They recognize that many of us are doing things that are going to cause us great suffering. And any loving parent who watches the child make bad decisions, any friend who watches a friend make bad decisions. One of my friends made a very bad marriage choice. I thought I could help her by telling her that this was not a good idea. And I did. I remember exactly where we were when I told her. She was not interested. She went ahead, she married the person. It proved to be, unfortunately, just what I expected. After it was over, she said, "Why didn't you tell me?" I said, "I did," and I told her exactly where we were. She said, "No, you didn't." Yeah. I mean, what can you say? It's just the way it is. Now, why did I say that? What was I talking about? Yes. Divine Mother loves us just the same. Whether we're good or naughty, she wants us to grow, right? And her naughty children are no less her children. They're just 2 years old compared to someone who might be 12. And when someone is 2, you teach them appropriately. You give them the right opportunities, knowing that they will grow up. But they have to first go through this whole cycle. So I started thinking about some of the people in the country that I live in who are behaving very badly. And even though I don't like their behavior, I mean public figures, not friends, public figures who are doing really awful things. And I instead of being angry with them, I began to feel very sorry for them, because there's going to be a lot of karma to pay off there, and it's not going to be any fun when they start receiving back what they've been giving out. So then I started realizing that Divine Mother's taking care of all of them just the same. And when a planet is transitioning from Kali Yuga, the material age, to the energy age, it's a very tumultuous time. And tremendous energy comes in, new technology comes in, tremendous possibilities for doing evil are there. You know, you can use the internet to disperse, the devil's own message and make it look like it's something nice. And the entertainment and just the total dismantling of any kind of moral fiber what to speak of abuse of power, and not even mentioning nuclear weapons, and on we go. So Divine Mother has allowed a lot of her really, really, really rowdy children to inhabit this planet with us because they need to destroy a civilization. And so they're here doing it. And they came on purpose, and they were sent by her to have that experience of destroying a civilization, and we came to lay the foundation of the new one. But it's not like, this was not a walk in the park. This is just what we signed on for, because guess what? It's our karma and we need it. And it's going to help us. Not what to speak of the good karma we get for being part of a new reality. And what's going on right now is the end of that cycle. Kali Yuga is over, and these people are working really hard to keep it going, but it doesn't have a chance of continuing. It has no chance. We are the future. But, it takes time to build a new reality. We're trying to, as Swamiji said to me once when Ananda was being persecuted by our neighbors, and when we first moved there, a whole bunch of us moved to this rural area, people we didn't know, and most of them were marijuana growers when it was illegal. And so their idea was to just, go to the country and disappear and then send their crop out a couple of times a year. Just down from Swami's house, there was a sign on the door that said, no trespassing without an invite or a warrant. That's what it said, right? The legalization of marijuana has destroyed the local economy, because now, we used to have this beautiful women's clothing store in town. We ran it for a few years, and the woman who ran it was so sweet, Paula. Some of you know, because she also died. I wrote about her death. But twice a year, what she lovingly called the harvest people would come in. And the harvest people would come in with rolls of $100 bills, and the women would outfit themselves, for the new season. Oh, the harvest people are here. She would get so happy. She was such a loving soul, So there was a bit of a conflict, because we went out and started advertising to the whole world and inviting them to come. So they didn't like us very much. And plus, we were the only thing that looked like authority, and they were very anti-authority. So it focused in on our mailbox, which was on the street, and we would put up a mailbox, and then they would drive a truck into it, knock it down, and we would put another one up. And one of the men, it became his personal quest to create the indestructible mailbox. And he sank a square foot of concrete, like 8 feet into the ground, and 4 feet coming up, and then he welded this, sheet metal thing, and then he welded it to it was a real work of art. And because they usually knocked it over with a truck, he really wanted them to try to drive their truck into the concrete. And we were serious about it, but also more than a little amused. And so it lasted about 6 months, maybe even longer than that. And then somehow they pried the top off and left the concrete pillar, but pried the top off, and then drove over the metal thing with their truck. And so we came out one morning, and there's just the concrete pillar and the smashed, thing at the top. So I told Swami about it. We didn't have phones then, and you just have to give verbal reports. So I told him that. He starts laughing, I start laughing. We thought it was really clever. Then Swami goes into his office. His house is what is now the living room for those of you who've been to Crystal Hermitage. That was his whole house then. And there were just partitions that didn't go up to the ceiling. I was in the kitchen, he was in the office behind the partitions, out of sight. But the whole thing is an acoustic shell. And he had this very big voice, anyway, especially in those days. And I'm making dinner, and he says, "Asha!" calls my name, as if he was like 100 miles away. "Asha!" He reverberates. He said, "You have to understand, we're trying to change all of society, and naturally it will take a little time." So that's how I always think of it. We're starting a whole new society, and naturally it's going to take a little time. And we're here on a mission. We really are. One of our friends used to run a program for children, And he appointed them all. He wanted them to be secret agents, and he wanted them to do secret service. They were secret agents for Divine Mother, and they had to go home during the week between the meetings, and they had to do secret service. They had to do things that Divine Mother wanted them to do to help people, but not tell anyone, because they were in the secret service, after all. And then they would come back and they would reveal what they'd done, and and how nobody knew, and wonderful, brilliant. We're in the secret service. We're not secret to each other, but we're secret to the rowdy ones. They don't know we're here. Yeah, yeah.
Can I ask you, so when a soul leaves their body and then they are going to be reincarnated, is there a time, like how long can that be? Is it different for different souls, or, is there a specific time? Or?
No, we can take as long as we want. The time frames in the Indian tradition are billions of years, and they call it the day and the night of Brahma. The day when creation is manifested and then the night is when all of creation is withdrawn. And Master said there are some souls that are manifested at the beginning of the day of Brahma and are still wandering in delusion and are withdrawn. And in a span of time beyond any possible comprehension. These are the way the Indian tradition explains this. This is how Master explained it. Because we can wander in delusion as long as we want. As long as whatever we're experiencing is more pleasurable to us than the effort required to shift it, we will continue to just repeat. And everybody has a different context. What is one thing for one is another for another. There used to be this, before we had a temple in Palo Alto, we have this beautiful temple now that used to be a church. But before that we had a storefront. And across the street for a long time there was a nightclub called the Vortex. And the bass of whatever was going on inside that place was so strong that you go under the road and you could feel it under the sidewalk like this. And in summer I used to ride a bicycle to and from the place, and one night I just was riding my bicycle and I went around behind it, and there was just crowds of people all dressed in black, just ant-like people. They were perfectly nice people if I'd met them in a store, but they were all, trying to get into the vortex so they could do that. And to me, it was my definition of hell, to put me into that place. And they were eager to get in. We're just all very different from one another. It just depends on where you're standing and what you've experienced and what your value is and what's important to you. And we just have to keep moving in our forward direction. Now here's one more piece of that before I want to take a short break here. These masters were not just, they didn't just pop out of the infinite as masters. And this is a great mistake that Christianity makes. Christianity has decided that there was never anyone before Jesus and there'll never be anybody after him. And they're really vague on how he got to be Jesus. We have this sort of Son of God thing, which is not clearly understood, and we have the Virgin Mary. I'm not mocking any of these things because they're magnificent, but they're not clearly understood. So Jesus is just there, like this. And in fact, the New Testament used to include lots of references to reincarnation because it was a fundamental Jewish belief in the time of Jesus' life, and it is still not in mainstream Judaism, but in esoteric Judaism, it's still there. And there are pieces of it that got left in. They literally took it out of the Bible. These are historical facts. And there's still pieces of it, like Jesus says, who do you think I am? And they name other prophets from earlier times, individuals who actually lived. And he doesn't correct them. He just goes on like this, and are you the Messiah? Well, they say, but he can't be the Messiah because Elijah has to come before the Messiah. Jesus says, oh, but Elijah has come, you all just didn't know that. And they knew he was referring to John the Baptist. I mean, what more explicit statement of reincarnation can you imagine? Now, what it means, and this is where you have to put the Gita and the Bible together. You have to put the tradition of India with the Christian tradition to make any sense out of the Christian tradition, honestly. And what it is that these are self-realized souls, which is they started just like you and me. These are jivas who started in delusion. Yogananda said he remembers all the way back to being a diamond. His individuality was distinct enough for him to remember being a diamond. I wear these astrological stones, one of which is a diamond, and I think, who are you? You know? And I was immensely interested in, like, what happens after you're a diamond? You know, is the emerald more advanced than the diamond? You know, or do you get to be a plant after you're a mineral? I don't know any of this, but he remembers all the way back to being a diamond. Now, from there to there, that means every single experience. Now think of this not as the individual's experience, but think of it as vibrations of consciousness that take the form that's appropriate for your particular jiva. You see what I mean? But the vibration of consciousness is an understanding between delusion and enlightenment. So every one of those masters went through every single vibration from a diamond to a God-realized master. So there's not anything any of us can do. Now I'll add to that, Yogananda said, anything that you're not attracted to doing anymore is because you tried it and you found out it wouldn't make you happy, so you're not interested in doing it anymore. And that includes rape, murder, torture, any kind of abuse that you can think of. And I mean, that's factual. That's how they explain it. Because we try everything. And you see all these rowdy people trying these things. Why are they doing it? Because they think it's going to make them happy. Because their vibration between delusion and enlightenment is at such a point that if I have power over you and I can hurt you, then I'll be strong. To me, to you, it seems incredibly stupid, right? But not to them, because that's where they are. So anything that any human being can do, most relevantly me and you, at this point, it's not merely that, that Jesus pats us on the head and says, well, you poor moron, you'll get it straight. It's not like that. It's like he actually says, oh yeah, I remember. Yeah, I remember. I remember what that felt like. Maybe you want to try this. Maybe this would help you. So never, not for a single second, don't ever be ashamed. And don't ever feel for a single second that you've shocked and separated yourself from God. There's simply, literally, not a thing you can do that they haven't done too. Oh yeah, been there, done that. Didn't work out well for me, probably won't work out well for you. Maybe you want to try this. Really think about that. Because I can't, everybody is embarrassed. There's just no reason to be embarrassed. Given who I am, this is what I would do. And if we move forward a quarter inch, if the murderer kills 5 members of the family and spares the baby, out of some compassion for the baby, Divine Mother says, great, good work. Because it's directional. And if we wake up from whatever idiotic thing we've done and realize that that wasn't such a good idea, Divine Mother says, good work. And Jesus says, Master says, yeah, I remember. That's a nice moment, isn't it, when you begin to realize that? You see how free that makes us? Yeah, and it's the truth, too. I mean, that's not a made-up story. That's just the implications of what they've already told us.